Amsterdam, 1609. A city of merchants opens the world's first true central bank, not a royal treasury, not a lending house for kings. A public bank owned by the city, open to anyone who could deposit silver coins. Within a decade, the Amsterdam Wisselbank, the exchange bank, would hold more money than most European kingdoms. Within a generation, it would create the first modern financial system. Stock exchanges, public debt markets, credit instruments that moved across borders without a single gold coin changing hands. The Dutch did not conquer Europe with armies. They conquered it with ledgers, contracts, and a revolutionary idea that trust, properly organized, was worth more than gold. This is the story of how a swamp city at the edge of Europe became the richest place on earth and invented the financial tools we still use today. To understand how Amsterdam became Europe's money capital, you need to see the world as it was in 1600. Spain was the superpower. Spanish gold and silver from the Americas, extracted through brutal colonial exploitation, flooded European markets. The Spanish Empire controlled vast territories across Europe, the New World, and parts of Asia. But Spain had a problem. Despite all that wealth, it was constantly broken. Spanish kings borrowed endlessly to fund wars, palaces, and the machinery of empire. They defaulted on their debts repeatedly, minus 1,557, 1575, 1,596. Creditors learned quickly. Lending to kings was profitable until the moment it wasn't. Meanwhile, in the northern provinces of the Spanish Netherlands, something unexpected was happening. Rebellion. The Dutch Revolt, also called the 80 Years' War, had begun in 1568. The northern provinces, led by William of Orange, were fighting for independence from Spanish rule. They were outgunned, outnumbered, fighting the most powerful military machine in the world. But they had one advantage: Spain did not. They had merchants, lots of them. And those merchants understood something the Spanish crown never grasped. Money is not wealth. Trade is wealth. And trade requires trust, transparency, and institutions that work. Amsterdam in 1600 was a city built on water and ambition. The Dutch had been traders for generations, but they were fragmented. No central authority, coordinated credit. No single currency was trusted. Money changers operated in private, and fraud was rampant. When a merchant from Hamburg wanted to do business with a trader in Amsterdam, they faced a chaos of different coins: Spanish reales, English pounds, various Dutch guilders, each with uncertain weight and purity. The transaction costs were enormous. The risk of fraud was constant. Trade was profitable, but friction made it slower and more expensive than it needed to be. The Amsterdam City Council saw an opportunity. In 1609, they established the Wisselbank, the exchange bank. It was a public institution. Backed by the city's authority, citizens could deposit coins of any kind. The bank would assess their true value, weigh the actual silver content, and credit the depositor's account in a standardized unit: bank money. For the first time, merchants could conduct trade without physically exchanging coins. They could transfer balances on the bank's ledgers. A merchant in Amsterdam could pay a creditor in Venice by instructing the Wisselbank to transfer credits, and the transaction would settle instantly. It's complete trust. Because the bank's ledgers were public and auditable, the Wisselbank did not lend. It did not speculate. It simply held deposits and facilitated transfers. And that simplicity made it trusted in ways no private bank had ever been. Within a few years, the Wisselbank held deposits worth millions of guilders. Anyone trading in Amsterdam, foreign or domestic, kept an account. The bank's money became more valuable than physical coins because it was stable, fungible, and universally accepted. Amsterdam was becoming the clearinghouse for European trade. The Wisselbank was only the beginning. In 1602, Dutch merchants had created something even more radical: the Dutch East India Company, the VOC. The VOC was not a traditional trading company owned by a single family or small partnership. It was a joint stock company. Ownership was divided into shares that could be bought and sold by anyone. Investors pooled their capital. The company used that capital to fund voyages to Asia, bringing back spices, textiles, and porcelain that fetched enormous prices in European markets. And here is the key innovation. Shareholders were not liable for the company's debts beyond their initial investment. If a ship sank or a voyage failed, investors lost only what they had put in. They were not personally ruined. This concept, limited liability, unlocks something extraordinary. Risk could be spread across hundreds or even thousands of investors. Ordinary people, merchants, widows, artisans, could invest small amounts and participate in global trade. By 1610, VOC shares were being actively traded in Amsterdam. Not in a formal building, just on a bridge, the Nieuwebrug, where brokers met daily to buy and sell shares, negotiate contracts, and spread information. By 1611, the Amsterdam Stock Exchange was formalized. A physical structure was built. Rules were established. It was the world's first true stock exchange. It changed everything. Suddenly, capital could move. A merchant who needed cash could sell shares. An investor who saw opportunity could buy. Price discovery happened daily. Liquidity, the ability to convert assets into cash quickly, became a feature of the market. The VOC's shares became the first widely traded financial asset in history. Within a generation, derivatives appeared, options, futures, short selling. Speculators emerged alongside genuine investors. Amsterdam was no longer just a trading hub. It was becoming a capital market. By 1620, Amsterdam was handling more trade than any other city in Europe. The Wisselbank held deposits that dwarfed the treasuries of most kingdoms. The VOC's market capitalization was larger than the GDP of many European nations. But this was still the beginning. Financial tools. Amsterdam was pioneering public banks. Stock markets, tradable debt, transparent ledgers were beginning to spread. Other cities watched carefully. London, Paris, Hamburg. They saw what Amsterdam had built and wanted to copy it. But copying the tools was not enough. What made Amsterdam unique was not the institutions themselves. It was the culture behind them, a culture of tolerance, where refugees and minorities, Jews, Huguenots, dissidents of every kind, could settle and do business without persecution. A culture of transparency, where merchants shared information because trust was more profitable than secrecy. And a culture of pragmatism, where profit mattered more than ideology. These were the invisible foundations beneath Amsterdam's visible success. And they were about to be tested. By the 1630s, Amsterdam was the richest city in Europe. VOC ships returned with cargoes worth fortunes. The Wisselbank's vaults held more silver than some national treasuries. Wealthy merchants built grand canal houses. Artists like Rembrandt painted their portraits. But beneath this prosperity, something strange was beginning to happen. Tulips. The flower had been introduced to Europe from the Ottoman Empire in the late 1500s. By the 1620s, they had become fashionable among Dutch elites. Rare varieties, especially those with striking color patterns caused by a virus, became status symbols. Owning the right tulip bulb showed taste, wealth, and refinement. Prices began to rise. At first, gradually, a rare bulb might sell for a few guilders, then dozens, then hundreds. The Semper Augustus, a bulb with red and white flame-like patterns, became the most coveted variety in Europe. By 1636, the market had changed completely. Tulip bulbs were no longer just flowers. They were financial assets. Traders who had never grown a tulip in their lives began buying and selling bulb contracts. Futures markets emerged. You could buy a contract for delivery of a bulb months in the future, sell that contract to someone else before the bulb ever existed. Speculation became frenzied. Prices became absurd. A single Semper Augustus bulb, one of the rarest varieties, sold for 5,500 guilders in January 1637. For context, skilled craftsmen earned roughly 300 guilders per year. A fine house in Amsterdam cost around 1,000 guilders. One bulb was worth 18 years of labor, or 5 houses. Stories circulated of fortunes made overnight. A sailor who mistook a rare bulb for an onion and ate it supposedly cost his employer thousands of guilders. Ordinary people, carpenters, weavers, servants, were entering the tulip market using borrowed money, convinced that prices would keep rising forever. And for a brief moment, it seemed they were right. Tulip mania was not a breakdown of Amsterdam's financial system. It was a demonstration of how powerful that system had become. The same tools that made VOC shares liquid and tradable futures contracts Credit instruments, speculative markets were now being applied to flower bulbs. Most transactions happened in taverns. Buyers and sellers met, negotiated prices, and signed contracts over beer. The contracts were informal but binding. The entire market ran on trust and social pressure, till February 1637. That month, at a routine bulb auction in Haarlem, something unexpected happened. No one bid. Prices had risen so high that buyers simply stopped appearing. The auction house sat silent. The bulbs went unsold. Word spread instantly. Within days, panic swept through the tulip market. If no one was buying, what were the contracts worth? Sellers rushed to find buyers. Buyers vanished. Prices collapsed. A bulb that had sold for 5,000 guilders in January was worth 50 guilders by March. Fortunes built over months evaporated in days. But here is what is remarkable. The broader Dutch economy barely noticed. The tulip bubble was confined to a relatively small group of speculators. The Wisselbank remained stable. The VOC kept trading. Amsterdam's real economy, built on shipping, manufacturing, and global commerce, continued functioning. The tulip mania became a cautionary tale, a story about speculation and excess. But it did not break the system. If anything, it validated Amsterdam's financial resilience. The institutions were strong enough to survive the madness. The real test came later, not from tulips, but from war. The Dutch Republic was still fighting for independence. The 80 Years' War would not end until 1648. Spain remained a constant military threat. Wars are expensive. Soldiers need pay. Ships need building. Fortifications need maintenance. And the Dutch had a problem. They were a republic, not a kingdom. They had no king to levy taxes arbitrarily. Power was decentralized among provinces and cities. How do you fund a war when you cannot force people to pay? Amsterdam's solution was brilliant. Public debt. The city, and later the States General of the Dutch Republic, began issuing bonds. These were loans from citizens to the government, paid back over time with interest. But Dutch bonds were different from Spanish or French debt. They were transparent. The terms were public. Interest payments were reliable. Most importantly, the bonds were tradable. If you bought a bond and needed cash, you could sell it to someone else. There was a secondary market. The bonds had liquidity. This made Dutch government debt attractive to investors in ways royal debt never was. By the 1640s, Amsterdam had developed the most sophisticated public debt market in the world. Citizens loaned millions to the government, not because they loved their leaders, but because the investment was sound. The government could fund the war without raising taxes to unbearable levels. It was a revolutionary model of state finance, and it worked. By 1648, the Dutch Republic had won its independence. The Treaty of Munster formally ended the 80 Years' War. Spain recognized the Dutch Republic as a sovereign nation. The Dutch had outlasted the greatest empire of the age, and they had done it not through superior armies, but through superior finance. The Wisselbank, the VOC, the stock exchange, the public debt market, all of these institutions had worked together to fund a republic that should not, by any conventional measure, have survived. But the system that had made victory possible was about to face a new challenge. A challenge not from Spain or France or any foreign enemy. Because success breeds imitation. Imitation breeds competition. Amsterdam did not fall in a single moment. It declined gradually, almost invisibly, as the institutions it had pioneered were copied and improved upon by its rivals. The first serious competitor was England. For most of the 17th century, England had been a financial backwater. Its government borrowed erratically. Its merchants operated without the institutional support the Dutch enjoyed. London had no equivalent to the Wisselbank or the Amsterdam Stock Exchange, but the English were watching and learning. In 1694, England established the Bank of England. It was modeled explicitly on the Amsterdam Wisselbank, a central institution to manage public debt, stabilize currency, and coordinate credit. But the Bank of England went further. It did not just hold deposits, it was actively lent to the government. It monetized debt in ways the conservative Wisselbank never had. Within a decade, London had built its own stock exchange, its own public debt market, its own network of credit instruments. The English copied everything Amsterdam had invented, and then they added military power. The Royal Navy, funded by the new financial tools England had learned from the Dutch, became the most powerful maritime force in the world. By the early 1700s, British merchants could trade globally under the protection of a navy that the Dutch could no longer match. Amsterdam remained wealthy, but it was no longer dominant. The decline of Amsterdam, as Europe's financial capital, was gradual and structural. Dutch trade remained strong through the 1700s. The VOC continued operating until 1799. The Wisselbank survived until 1820, but the center of gravity was shifting. London's financial markets grew larger, deeper, more liquid. British government debt became the safest investment in Europe. The pound sterling began to replace the Dutch guilder as the preferred currency for international trade. Amsterdam's merchant families, the regents who had built the Republic's wealth, became conservative, risk-averse. They invested in safe assets rather than bold ventures. The hunger that had driven the Dutch Golden Age faded. Meanwhile, London attracted the ambitious, the desperate, the innovative, refugees, entrepreneurs, speculators. The same energy that had once flowed to Amsterdam now flowed to Britain. By 1780, London had overtaken Amsterdam as Europe's leading financial center. By 1800, it was not even close. The Dutch Republic itself fell in 1795, conquered by French revolutionary armies. It was reorganized into the Batavian Republic, then the Kingdom of Holland, under Napoleon's brother. The political independence that the Dutch had fought 80 years to win was lost in a single decade. But Amsterdam's legacy did not die. Every modern financial system, from London to New York to Hong Kong, is built on the foundations. It's Amsterdam late in the 1600s, the concept of a central bank that manages public debt and stabilizes currency. Amsterdam invented it. Stock exchange where shares are freely traded and prices are publicly discovered. Amsterdam built the first one. The use of government bonds as a tool to fund state operations without arbitrary taxation. Amsterdam pioneered it. The idea that limited liability corporations can pool capital from thousands of small investors, the VOC proved it worked. Even the practices we associate with speculation, short selling, preachers, contracts, were all developed in Amsterdam's markets in the 1600s. When England built the Bank of England in 1694, it was copying the Wisselbank. When the United States created the New York Stock Exchange in 1792, it was copying Amsterdam's model. When modern central banks manage monetary policy and stabilize financial systems, they are following principles first established on the canals of 17th-century Amsterdam. The Dutch did not invent money, but they invented the way modern economies organize it. The story of Amsterdam's financial revolution is not a story of conquest or empire. It is a story of innovation under pressure. The Dutch were a small nation surrounded by enemies. They had no natural resources. No powerful king, no large army. What they had was necessity. And they responded to that necessity by building institutions that made trust scalable, capital mobile, and risk manageable. The Wisselbank made currency reliable. The VOC made investment accessible. The stock exchange made capital liquid. The public debt market made the government accountable. These were not accidents. They were solutions to specific problems. And because they solved real problems, they spread. London copied Amsterdam. New York copied London. Every major financial center in the world today operates on principles that were first tested in a swamp. City at the edge of Europe 400 years ago, Amsterdam's dominance faded. That is inevitable. Every center of power eventually declines. But the tools Amsterdam created did not fade. They evolved. They spread. They became the infrastructure of the global economy. The next time you check a stock price, transfer money electronically, or see a government issue bonds to fund infrastructure, you are using financial technology invented in 17th century Amsterdam. The Dutch did not conquer the world. They built the operating system the world still runs on. And that, in the end, is a more lasting form of power than any empire. If this documentary changed the way you think about financial innovation, global trade, and the hidden origins of modern capitalism, please like this video and subscribe.